Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the New York Times best-selling author of award-winning action novels, including the Jonathan Grave thrillers and the Veronica Emerson thrillers. Master of action-driven suspense, he's touted as one of the most accomplished writers on the planet, and his books have been translated into more than 20 languages. That's right. It's your favorite writer of mine, John Gilstrap. John, how the heck are you?
I am well, thank you. I just have to correct you. It's Victoria Emerson, not
Shoot.
Veronica.
You
That's
know
okay.
what? It is.
It's
So on my
you got
computer screen,
Veronica and Betty.
it's in
It's
little
it's
small font. Well, this is why we do it live. So,
that's
well,
right.
anyway, well, we're going to talk about the series. Of course, we're going to get into. You've written at least what three specific series: the Jonathan, the Victoria, and then also the Irene River series. And you also done
Right.
some
It's the
standalones
newest.
and everything like that. So I found that with these chats, what I usually like to do is try to, go like. Do you remember the very first thing that you did that would be considered creative, whether it be a short story, poem, drawing, or even maybe it was, a novel? Like, do you remember like how long ago that was and what that was?
How far you want to go back?
As far as you want to go back.
Okay. Let's go to I was very deep. So if you go to well, junior high is what we had. So it was first through sixth and then seventh and eighth. So it was either seventh or eighth grade. I made our literary magazine with a haiku. And it was, are you ready for this? I actually remember it. A roar overhead, an explosion and a cloud. The world has ended.
All right. So
I
you were
know.
already writing some dark stuff back
I
then.
know that wasn't disturbing to my parents at all. It
I
was the
mean,
60s or 70s. So,
so at that point, so the haiku, so like were you dabbling in more poetry, or like what did you end up, like how did you eventually kind of morph into, because I always say that, for us writers, it's kind of just a normal thing because we're used to it, but it's also a very strange thing for wanting to kind of lock yourself away and just spend time inside your head. Like at what point did you become, start trying to tell stories more so?
well, for me, well, let me explain the haiku in particular. That was a classroom assignment, write a
Right.
haiku, and the English teacher said, "Oh, that's good. Let's put it in the literary magazine." So that was not
Now,
my
wait,
my
so was
life's
this the
dream
high
to write
school's
haiku.
Right. I'm sorry. You said this was the high school's literary
Yeah,
magazine, or was this something else? Okay, it wasn't like
now that that saddle
highlights or
stitch thing
whatever.
that they put out
Yeah.
for parents, right? Yeah, that's what. But no, I've always written. That's my God knows I'm not athletic, right? So it was, I think looking back, I've written hundreds of short stories. I mean, hundreds of short stories. Earliest memories, like when I was a child, I was making up stories, and I think part of it was either loneliness. I had a fine childhood. It was an odd childhood, but it was fine. Um, I wasn't a cool. I was never a cool kid, and you know, I read a lot and I wrote a lot, and I think I just liked escaping into that world. I think it's the same thing that people who write music do, or people who play the guitar, or they fix cars, or whatever. You get into that space where you escape. And for me, it was just writing. But earliest memories, I don't remember a time when I wasn't doing it.
So what were you reading back in like because right now, I mean, we think of John Gilstrap, we think of action thrillers, so I guess we'll get into your first novel, which I guess was more considered like a crime thriller. Like what were you reading at that time? What was it, those types of books, or were you reading like a different types of genres?
Well, I was always ahead of my grade. It was um, kind of always toward the action thrillers. I found the Hardy Boys, all those that the cliches ultimately boring because not a lot happened. So I would read kind of whatever was on the parents' bookshelves at the time. I read a lot of Alistair MacLean, who was certainly hardcore action. Um, I would read some as I became an adolescent. I would read the stuff my mom didn't want me to read, but that she was reading, Valley of the Dolls, and not all of them, but I would find the parts that I wanted to read. Page 27 of The Godfather, for example, every boy knows. Um, the wedding scene. Um, I'm an omnivore. So, but normally, basically, I would go to action thrillers. There was a writer called Trevanian. I don't know what
Hmm.
happened to him. He was a huge bestseller in the 70s and 80s. All right, I've been around the planet quite a few times, so I'm 68 years old. So in the 70s and 80s, and then I discovered The Day of the Jackal when so I was in high school when that came out by Frederick Forsyth, and that kind of changed my life. I'd always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to write thrillers, and that when I read that book, which is about the assassination of Charles de Gaulle, and I'm also a current events and history nerd. So, and Charles de Gaulle was never assassinated. Spoiler. Um, and when I read that book, I was fascinated by it, but I also saw for the first time how he made it exciting. I saw the structure of a thriller. I never took a creative writing class, well, one, but that was a disaster. But I sort of saw how he used space breaks and just kind of the structure of a plot to build the pacing. It took a long time to figure out actually how to do it, but I saw how he did it, which I found very, very exciting. Um, and that was, it took him 35 days to write that book. 35 days on a typewriter. That's sort of inspiring and makes me angry.
Wow.
So yeah, I was an omnivore. I was always reading anything that came along.
And well, you mentioned short stories. I mean, do you remember, like, was it in high school or middle school when you started writing some short stories besides the haiku? I mean, the haiku obviously was a class assignment that you had published then in the school's literary magazine. But you mentioned you said you've written like over 100 short stories. At what point did you start dabbling in that?
Again, as a child, and when I say short stories, I don't want to overblow short stories. So we're talking about writing scenes, right? I was entertaining myself by
Flash fiction.
it didn't have a name, right? I was just writing stuff onto the page to
Right.
entertain myself. That was the, didn't again. The idea was never to show it to anybody. The idea was just to kind of uh, put a story on the page. It would be like flipping channels, but in my head, if that makes any sense. I was really inspired by television at the time. I was on the very tail. I'm not sure if I ever saw Twilight Zone in its first run, but I saw a lot of the Twilight Zone when I was growing up. So I think it might have been reruns, but maybe not. Uh, and Rod Serling's storytelling, I think, was just fascinating, and that got me going. There was actually a lot of that was on television. There was the movies of the week, which were 90-minute mysteries. That was Columbo and Macmillan and Wife, and these regular mystery series that I found very engaging, and I kind of wanted to emulate on the page, just because it was not so much writing for television. I always thought that would be cool, but not telling the story, peeling back the onion of a mystery and making somebody go ooh,
Yeah.
or making somebody jump. Then I was in college when I discovered Stephen King, which is probably about the time that that's probably when Carrie came out. It's probably about the time that first hit. Although that's not the first thing I read. The first thing I read was a collection of short stories. I forget what it was called.
Night shift.
Yeah, probably. I remember the little helicopter men. That's a short story that sticks out. But then I devoured his work for a long time because he does amazing things. He does amazing things with the language, and he does amazing thing with characters and points of view. The way he gets, I call it a wormhole, where you get into the story and you become the story. It's just in a way that is the few other writers can do. And then I read Pet Sematary when my wife was pregnant, so I went off Stephen King for a while.
Yeah, no, that's not a good book to
mistake.
read when you have a spouse that's pregnant. So, okay, well, let's talk about in 1996, if my quick research before this proves right.
Mm-hmm.
That's when Nathan's Run was published. That was your first novel. Now, was that your first published novel, or was that your first novel?
That was my first published novel. It was the fourth novel that I had written.
Okay.
Um, the other three were like the short stories. They were just kind of. I never thought I didn't write Nathan's Run, which I called Nathan at the time. I didn't write it with the idea of ever getting published. I wrote it because I thought it was a really cool story and it was in my head. And if you don't put it on paper, um, it just stays in your head. And it wasn't until I don't know, I wrote that in about 4 months. And I was about three-quarters of the way through it when I realized I had something here. Um, and I think it was because I had doing that was 30 years ago, right? So I've had some time to do the postmortem. And I think the difference was I made I intentionally decided to tell the story as if I were telling it to a friend, as opposed to writing a book. So I did what I thought was the Stephen King thing. We use regular vernacular, and uh, like I was heavily into the fire service at the time, so I talked like a guy instead of trying to talk like a writer, and it worked. It resonated. At least it resonated to my ear, and then as it turned out to a lot of other ears.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I mean, I think that's kind of a hard thing as a writer to kind of remind yourself sometimes is that you are just telling a story. You have to kind of
Mm-hmm.
like as, yes, you're writing it, you're creating it, but at the same time, you're still telling it. And I think that sometimes writers get too much in their heads of that, that whole writer aspect that they kind of, yeah, it's this weird kind of, I don't even know how to even, explain it, but I understand what you're talking about exactly.
I think you can't care about, certainly in the early stages, you can't care about selling the book. I think you have to care about writing the story
Finishing
that you
it.
want to write. Well, yeah, certainly finishing it is a thing. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to train myself away from that phrase. Um, when the book is finished, the win is if you read it and it's exactly what you wanted it to be. That's the win. Whether anybody else wants to buy it or not, that's the icing on the cake. But the win is when you've said exactly what you want to say the way you've wanted to say it, and that's rare. I think it's the breakthrough for a new writer, because I think I don't know who's out there, but if you are new, or if you're struggling or aspiring, whatever is the right phrase here, when you've written that paragraph or that chapter that's not quite right. You're just hoping that nobody will notice it. They will, and only you got to fix it somehow. That's your job. And that was the problem with the first three books I did, was that I knew they were broken. I never tried to sell them, because what would be the point? I knew that they were not as good as the books that I was reading. So uh, I wasn't. What's the point of trying to sneak through? When I was done with Nathan, which became Nathan's Run, I read it and I knew it was as good or better than a lot of the books that I had been reading, at least to
Yeah,
my ear.
yeah, and I definitely want to talk a little bit more about Nathan's Run. Before that, though, those three previous novels, were they in the same like vein of genre, or do you remember like what type of books they were?
They were all kind of thrillers. They were all forced, because the first one I didn't really have anything to write about, so I kind of uh, I forced the story of uh, kind of a murder in the woods, which actually became the source of it. I kind of brought it back to life for a short story I did for an anthology earlier this year. An entirely different story, but I brought the concept back to life, which was kind of cool.
Hmm.
Um, and then there was a fire service story that, quite honestly, I've got about 300 pages into it, and I realized it was never going to work, because I was too close to the material, and it just wasn't. It was crap. It wouldn't work. But with Nathan's Run, that was actually based on a thing that I saw I was working I live in Prince William County, Virginia. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. It's a suburb of Washington D.C., but only if you're a real estate agent. Okay, it's a long ways from Washington, and I had a business there, environmental safety consulting business, and I was pretty involved in the community. And I was named to this to the county's human resources budget integration committee or something like that. It's some committee that was designed to cut the human resources budget, to advise on what parts of the human resources budget to cut for the county, because the politicians didn't have the stones to do it themselves. And and this is like the women's shelters and the, you know, all the stuff that you kind of think governments should do, or I prefer that governments would do. And so you take these people, they come in and they plead their case, which is, you know, they're all, some are more worthy than others, to be honest with you. Well, I made the decision, as I guess I had stepped out to the bathroom and I was named chairman when I came back. And I made the decision we should visit these places. And the first place I visited was the juvenile detention center. And when I went in there, I saw, now a juvenile is a juvenile, right? So you can be 9 or you can be 17. And you think about the developmental differences, and they're all housed in the same place. They're not necessarily in the same cells, but in the common area, they're all together. So think about that. You know, there's a big difference. And I saw there was one kid, never followed up. I have no idea what it was, but I saw this one kid in his you know, the orange thing. And it was sitting all by himself. There was like this big multi-purpose room. It was probably a cafeteria at one point, but at this point it was a gym, and later it would be a movie theater or whatever. You know, that big multi-purpose room that's in the middle of an an institutional place. And he was just miserable. He just sat there. He looked lonely. He looked terrible, and kind of tore my heart out. And by that time, I think my son was probably 7 or 8. And I thought, you know, first of all, to be incarcerated at all would terrify me. And then to be surrounded by all these people who were so much bigger and probably meaner than you are. And that sparked my imagination in a way that just kind of ran away with Nathan's Run. And that's why I was able to write it in like 4 months. That helped a lot to have that inspiration.
Yeah. And for people who aren't aware, can you give the quick elevator pitch for Nathan's Run?
Yeah, I mean, Nathan is a 12-year-old. He's in a juvenile detention center for having boosted. His uncle is his custodial parent or his guardian, and he stole the car, and the uncle doesn't want to keep him, so he's in the juvenile detention center. And he is attacked by a guard, and he kills the guard in self-defense. And he runs away. He escapes. But to all the world, it looks like he killed the guard to escape. So while he's on the road or on the run by himself, the entire world is misinterpreting what he's done. And he ends up, remember, this is written in the 90s. So there's a lot of this story that won't work today. And he's listening to the radio as he's breaking into homes. This is summertime. So he figures out a way to determine who's probably on vacation. And he breaks into their homes for shelter. And he listens to the radio, and he hears the things that people are saying about it. One in particular, it's like a female then Rush Limbaugh, who was just saying horrible things about him. So he calls in on his own and tells his side of the story. And so it's about the media, and it's about the prosecutors getting over their skis, and the police who have to do a job that they don't necessarily want to do, but they have to do. They have to bring this kid in, and he's trying to survive. And meanwhile, while the cops are trying to get him, there's an assassin trying to get him too, because they need him dead. That's why he was attacked in prison. So that's the overview.
Right. And so this comes out in, it was published in 96. So obviously you wrote it before then.
94.
I
wrote it in 94. It came out in 96.
Right.
I wrote it in 94.
Right. So you you write it, like, did you know at that point? Because I'm assuming you had gotten an agent. I mean, based on how this was a big book deal, it wasn't something you were probably sending. I mean, and obviously, publishing has really changed. I mean, there was a while where you could send stuff directly to publishers. I think Cormac McCarthy had done that with his first novel. He used to send it to, directly to a publisher. Um, did you? Because even back then, I mean, I mean, I kind of remember what it was like back then. Obviously, the internet wasn't as big as it was. It was harder to find agents than it was,
The internet
than
wasn't.
I mean, you had like I guess America Online, but there was really nothing. There was no resources. There was a big book. I think it was. I forget what it was called. It was like a writer's almanac type thing of literary agents, or I mean, like, how did you go about finding that your first agent for this book?
Funny you
Talk
bring
a little
this
bit about
up.
that
I,
process.
I just redid my office. This is all new. And this isn't because of this, but I happen to have it. You might see this is the 1995 Guide to Literary Agents.
Wow.
And it lists every literary agent in America, maybe in the world, and you can see the highlights. So I go through, and in the margins, you can see the ones that I had sent to and when they were rejected and what not to send to, I read every single entry, and then sent out query letters. And query letters then were letters. You stuffed them in an envelope and licked a stamp and sent it in. And no, there was no AOL. That was not a thing yet. I mean, we're talking,
Oh,
it
well,
was
I'm
on the
thinking late
cusp.
90s. Sorry. I was born
Yeah.
81, so I remember at least in late 90s that there was AOL.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's right. You were not more 94, so we're kind of on that
Right.
cusp of
Right. It was
thinking
very
like that.
cuspy.
Yeah.
And
So, and I remember at least when I'd gotten my first agent out of college, this was the early 2000s. This was, and I mean, obviously you had sold this. I mean, this was back where you had to print out the manuscript and actual copies of the manuscript were being mailed to the publishing house. And there was a chance you weren't even going to get that manuscript back. I mean, it was going to be gone, as opposed to now where, an agent just puts, attaches a Word doc or a PDF or whatever to an email and sends it out. Like, there was an actual submission process. So, I mean, at what point, I mean, I guess, like, were you getting letters back or were people calling you? I mean, this was not like, easy email type things.
well, you send the query letter out with an SASE, self-addressed stamped envelope, and the rejection letter. let's be honest, right? The rejection letter would come back in the envelope, pre-stamped, right? Self-addressed stamped
So,
envelope.
so you always knew when you got in the mail, you're like, oh, I recognize this because you, you had sent it out.
Well, there's hope that maybe it's an acceptance letter. No, acceptances come by phone call. That's what I learned. And actually, the really interesting story here. The rejection letters come in various forms. Some people try to be friendly. Most are these, 100th generation, either Mimeo then or Xerox copies that are barely legible, and they say "Dear," and then they write in John, and then it tells me about how good the book is. It just doesn't meet their needs, and then there's a stamp signature. But some will write, something reasonably kind in the margin or whatever. But my favorite rejection of all, just because it is so horribly callous, was they sent me back my letter, like my "Hi, my name is John" letter, with a stamp like ka-chunk that said no. That was it. Just I thought, come on. Yes. I mean, I
Wow.
laughed at the time. I thought, come on, just have a little bit of heart. But
So, well, you get the call. You get a call. I mean, how many with Nathan's
rejected
Run? How
27
many?
times.
Right, it was Rick Toy. Sometimes, did you have more than one agent at the time interested?
Uh, all right. Here's the reality. And folks, if you're going through this is true even now in the digital age. If you're sending out query letters and you're getting rejections, your story is not being rejected because nobody's seen your story. You have a dog poo query letter, right? You should be able to sell a steaming stack of nastiness with a good letter. We've
Yeah,
all
sure.
fallen for it, right? So it's your letter that sucks. It's not your story. Your story could suck, but they don't know that yet. So your query package, if it's shiny, you should be getting requests for chapters. And if the chapters or the story is being rejected, well, that's what it is. So I realized, having been a businessman my whole life, at that all 38 years of it, I realized that the letter was broken. There's something wrong with it. So I started tweaking it. I slowed down. The first time I sent out letters, I think I sent out 10, and they were all rejected within a week by US mail, 5 days. I mean, come on. So I slowed down the submission rate, and I was tweaking them as they went along. And towards the end, I actually got one guy who said that he might be interested if I would make such and such changes. And this started a communication, kind of slow motion back and forth. And I think, in all fairness, I really think that he thought that he was my agent at that point, but he never asked me. And then I got a call from the agent who was, I've since fired for other reasons, but $1 million Mall is what she was called, and for good reason. And so I hired her, and I had to tell this guy that I rejected him, which is, there's certain coolness to that. And he was generally somewhere between hurt and angry. And then when I asked him to return the manuscript, he had his feelings hurt because I was implying that he would do something bad with the manuscript. But hey, business is business.
Yeah.
So that's a long answer to the question, but at the end of the day, you only have one. There, I did it again. You only have one agent.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really weird. I mean, especially starting out, the writer agent relationship is it's odd because at first, when you don't have an agent, you need to do whatever you can to try to get an agent. And then technically, when you have an agent, that agent is working for you. You're kind of the one in charge making those decisions. And of course, there is a good working relationship with an agent is more like a partnership. It's not like, someone, it's kind of like, I don't know. I'm just thinking about this now. I don't know if you would agree with this, but it's kind of like, you're on, like no one's really above the other one. You're kind of like working hand in hand, because the better you do, the better they do, and vice versa.
Right. And it has to be that way. And I've been with my current agent, Ann Hawkins, for at least 20 years, and at least that many books. And we don't have a contract. I've never had a contract with an agent. I don't have a contract with my movie agent either, because that doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. The agency contract is actually in the book contract or in the movie contract, which says that they get their commission. Because if the time ever comes that I don't know, that I don't feel that they're serving my best interests, or if I'm not earning enough money for them, or whatever the case may be, if you don't, you want to be able to walk away from that kind of relationship without any, just be able to walk away. You don't want to be tied, because that agency thing, that the business part of it stays there, the money making part of it stays there. I've never been remotely inclined to do that. I love Anne a lot. She's worked very hard for me, and things have worked very well. But if you're not comfortable with your agent, which is why I fired Molly ultimately, I no longer thought she was serving my best interests, and which is and she probably thought she was. I don't know, but just if you're not comfortable, if you're not feeling loved, feeling welcome, then time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the time, I mentioned like my very first agent, I got a call. He says, I really like your book. I want to represent you. And I was like, great. And it was like, it was just like, okay, we're now, I forget how many, I think my current agent, I've been with her for a while now. And, I think she's probably my third or fourth. Like, I remember at that point really having a conversation, especially because you've gone through that whole process where you really, it's almost like a job interview type thing where you want to know like how they work and if it's going to work well with you, because again, it's this working relationship. And so so for writers out there, if you do get to, fortunate enough to have more than one agent interested, do not rush into things, have a conversations with them, really kind of feel them out because ideally this is somebody that, fingers crossed you would be working with for quite a while. The most important, I don't know about you, but the most important question I had was if this book does not sell, well, what happens to us? Because some agents are just in it for that book.
Mhm.
Whereas opposed to the right answer, what you really want to get to is, if this doesn't sell, then, we go on to the next thing because I'm not representing the book, I'm representing you.
Right.
That's ideally what you want to hear. But this is more, we want to talk about you, not about just how to get an agent. So let's talk about Nathan's Run real quick. So this comes out, huge book deal. I guess it went to auction?
Well, it started at an auction and then it went to a preemptive bid.
Right. So, I mean, it was essentially a preempt is kind of their way of, I mean, they're still paying a lot of money for it, but it's
Yes.
kind of avoiding an option, but it's, or an auction. And then so, back in the day, because I was looking on Amazon, I don't know if it was associated with like, I guess, Publishers Weekly, review or something, but it mentions, like the first printing was 100,000 copies. Um, a lot of money for ad promo, Tora. I never really can know how to trust those numbers, but it was saying a lot of money for that. So clearly they wanted to put a lot into it. Now, to cut to the chase, because you've been open about this in the past, the book did not do as well, right, as the publisher was hoping.
That's fair. The book did really, really, really well. I mean, it the
Yes.
list, it did all the stuff it's supposed to do, but it
But
did not,
compared to what
it
they
did,
paid for it.
yes, it did not earn out its advance. And that ultimately became a problem because by then it was we sold the hard copy, the hardcover deal was a really big deal, but then the paperback deal went to Warner Books, was a separate deal for even more. So when the hardcover, uh, it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, it's not they're not embarrassing numbers. I don't remember what the numbers are anymore. But it was not. It didn't sell 100,000 copies, so like 80,000 copies in hardcover. And so
Which
now
is still
everybody's over.
great. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
people have to
fantastic.
understand, like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
those are still great
yeah.
numbers. It's
And
just the accountants
that
at the publisher are maybe like,
right.
well, maybe not as great.
And that's before you get to all the foreign countries and all that. So it was, everybody was very excited. Got a little too excited at the bargaining table. So ultimately, that falls on me. So by then by the time Nathan's Run had come out, we had sold at all costs my second book for even more money uh, on on the dream of what Nathan's Run was going to do. So it's kind of like the Hangover struck, and it's also happened at a time it was really interesting transition time in publishing when um, Barnes and Noble was actually the bad guy then coming in and because nobody everybody at that point Amazon was a joke. Really, I mean, who's gonna there's this internet thing, really, just website. Who needs a website? That's all bullshit. Nobody needs that. So it was Barnes and Noble was the bin, and Borders. The big box stores were putting all the little guys out of business, and it was the little guys where all the money was made. That's how you sold books back then. That was the book selling model. People were not used to dealing with individual buyers for these big stores. It was just the decision making was done differently. So it was an awkward time, and so there you go. So it ended up being after four books for me. I had made a whole bunch of money, but then I couldn't give away a book after four books
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
all
No,
that's
publish.
in the entertainment business. Anything that goes wrong is the artist's fault. Always, whether it's if a movie doesn't open, it's because of the actor, right? It's not
Yeah.
going to be because of the marketing company.
Yeah.
So, and that's fair. I don't. It is you sign on for what it is. I had no idea you're a rookie, and
Yeah.
I'm not. Let it be known, I am not complaining because there's a really happy ending to this story.
Well, before we move on, since then Nathan's Run, I mean, it's still, I guess, has stayed in print.
Mhm.
It was republished now. Looking at the Amazon thing, it said the author's original ending for the first time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, actually, it went out of print. HarperCollins and Warner; those are the two. The HarperCollins in hardcover and Warner um, in paperback. It went out of print, and then Kensington, my current publisher, bought the rights back, printed it again, and it's been nothing but profitable ever since. So, you know, what do you think? I don't know. So the original ending. Well, God, how do you tell an ending
Well, okay,
without
yeah, we don't want to
spoiling
give
things?
spoilers for people who want to
Yeah,
read it, but can you talk about like how different was
they
it ending?
convinced me to truncate the ending. I had kind of a uh, admittedly kind of maudlin ending that uh, I don't know. It kind of ended with a hug, a literary hug, and back then in the '90s, it kind of ended with a question. It was they convinced me to end things at a place that I was not comfortable. And it wasn't a bad place. Don't get me wrong. It was just I said it was my rookie outing, and you hear all these experts telling you, and I said okay.
It
So when I had a
it's
chance to
tough.
do it over again, I put my old ending back.
I mean, it's tough being a brand new author, especially they're paying you a lot of money. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know better. And because again, and I've always had this conversation with writers where, like, we talked about like Thriller Fest, like, ITW is a really great organization. And they often deal a lot with, craft and whatever else. And I think the ITW is starting to do this more because I've talked to people in the organization about it, like really the business aspect. If you want to make this a career, there's really no workshops. I mean, all the workshops are like how to write a good opening chapter or how to do whatever else. It's never really about like, okay, be aware that you have to set aside 30% or however much for taxes, and this is what you can write off, and just things, that whole business aspect of it. People just, it's one of those things where they just learn as they go, and it's, yeah, and it can be
Yeah,
tough. It can be very
and
tough.
how to own your own decisions in these things. It's hard because I had everybody. My agent agreed on the ending. My agent agreed. The editor agreed. My agent's assistant agreed. It was everybody agreed that their ending was better than mine. So all right,
Yeah.
good. So
So
and then
all right, well, I don't
go
want to
ahead.
spend any more time on Nathan's Run. We had to move on, but
Okay.
I do want to say that on Amazon, it does have it listed as the first book in a series, Bannon Brothers series. Is there what is that about?
I've tried to I don't know how to change that stuff. I've talked to
Okay.
Kensington about it. There are no Bannon
Like
brothers that I'm
like was
aware
it a
of.
plan to be a series at some point?
No, there are no Bannons in the whole freaking book. I have no idea where that comes from.
All right. Well, okay. So let's go on. So obviously your I guess your most well-known series right now is the Jonathan Graves series, if I remember correctly. Book one came out in 2009.
Sounds
At
right.
that point, can you talk about, you had done a lot of standalones. Was the first book going to be initially a standalone, or did you know from the very beginning, okay, this is a character that I want to at least try to do a couple books with?
Well, first, before we do that, there's an interstitial book we need to talk about, and I think you want to get back to it. But I just have to say that I did there's a nonfiction book I did
Well,
that
yeah,
was a
let's
Delta.
talk about this. Let's talk about how the 6 Minutes to Freedom with Kurt Muse. Can you talk about at what point, I guess, when you were writing these standalones, that came about?
Well, but with this whole thing with the career kind of collapsing, I guess. I mean, it just got to the point that nobody wanted to publish a Gilstrap book anymore. And it's not like I was still writing the way I'd written. It's just things were awkward, so I needed to change something, and I wasn't sure what it was going to be. And then I was introduced to this guy Kurt Muse, who was uh, he was taken hostage, or he was arrested in Panama in the late '80s for running an illicit radio network against Manuel Noriega, who was a really bad guy in Panama, and he was jailed and became a political prisoner in the days leading up to Operation Just Cause, which is liberation of Panama during the Bush administration, the 41 Bush administration. And he was rescued by Delta Force and delivered to his family virtually on Christmas Eve in 1989. And it's just this fabulous true story. And the shootout in his rescue is just amazing. Soon to be a Netflix picture, by the way. So I was introduced to him and I learned his story. And the parts of the story, the rescue had been sort of written up as nonfiction in a very repertorial form, but not the way that I wanted to write it from the point of view of the shooters and from the rescued and all that. But I also, his family had to run from the country. His 15-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son had to flee the country by themselves because the PDF, Panamanian Defense Forces, were chasing them to kill them. So, it's kind of a big deal. So I wrote that story, and it's the only story that at that point, maybe there have been others since, but at that point, it's the only book that Delta Force has ever cooperated in, and that's a long story too. We got sort of presidential permission to do that through 41. Another cool story, but not for this. So anyway, I had all of this valuable research on special forces and how they do their stuff and the weapons they use, and I've always been a gun guy. That's kind of my comfort zone anyway. But I've never been a soldier. Right? I've never been in the military. I was in fire service for 15 years, but I've never been a soldier. So this inspired me to write the Jonathan Graves series, which is about a freelance hostage rescue guy, and which is inspired by conversation I had with a hostage rescue team guy who FBI, who if you're kidnapped overseas, the American Intelligence Network starts working on your rescue right away. And if you're going to, if 9 times out of 10, it's going to be done, if you're in France, it's going to be the French military or French gendarme who come in and rescue you, and not a problem. But if you're part of the country where we're not welcome, it's going to be probably either some combination of Delta Force or SEAL Team 6 or whatever. And when those rescues happen overseas, the rescuing the precious cargo, rescuing the hostage is the mission. That's it. That's the mission. The rest of it, gathering intel and all that, that's secondary. In the United States, when somebody's taken hostage, kidnapped, the primary mission, actually, the hostage rescue team guy called it a homicide in slow motion. Not that they're not trying to rescue the hostage. Obviously, they want to rescue the hostage. They're not. That's very, very high on the list. But careers don't end if the hostage dies. Careers end if the bad guys get away. So the real priority is to make sure you have a solid case to do the rescue. You want to make sure that you've got the warrants. You want to make sure that the wiretaps are allowed, and that everything you're doing is in place before you go and rescue the hostage, which is a very slow motion thing. So I got this idea of having a freelance hostage rescue specialist who doesn't give a shit about all that constitutional stuff, which I think John thinks is very important, right? But in this world, in his world, he's just going to go and get your loved one and separate them. So that's kind of the basis of the Jonathan Graves series. And now I think I'm writing the 18th book in that series.
Right. I was going to say, I saw that said the 17th book comes out, I believe, in February.
Yes.
So at that
Scorched
point,
Earth.
again, when you started that very first book, did you, because again, sometimes what become a series, that first novel is just a standalone, and then they realize like, oh, okay, this character, maybe we can do more with it. I mean, or like from the very beginning, did you realize, okay, this is hopefully, fingers crossed, this is going to be the first book in a series?
I had always envisioned it as a series, but you got to be careful, because if I'm the only one in the world who does, you want to make sure that you give a satisfying ride to the reader. So there were like the A story and the B story are closed solid, but you kind of leave a C story and D story ready for further development, So so I had always envisioned it as a series. And I think Kensington envisioned it as a series. I know they did, because when they bought it, they bought 2 books. So they bought No Mercy, and then book two, which became Hostage Zero.
And at that point, had you even imagined that you would get like past a dozen books in that series? I mean, because sometimes series you kind of feel like, okay, I might be able to squeeze like 4 or 5 books out of this. I mean, here I mean, you're gonna, I'm sure probably end up close to 20, right?
Yeah, I'm under contract for 18. Um, and we'll see. You're you're out of your mind if you think you're going to have a run this long. I've been very, very fortunate. Um, Part of it, I'll give myself a little pat on the back here because I've created a world for Jonathan where Jonathan's world is such that there's a lot of places where I can hang other stories. Jonathan is the benefactor for a place called Resurrection House, which is the uh, residential home for the children of incarcerated parents, which is kind of a cool thing. I think we should have those. Um, which means that every kid in that school has a parent who perhaps wants to wants harm to come to them. So that's you have all of that can be developed. We have Jonathan who has his background in the Delta Force operations, and God knows how many enemies those are. So it's just I sort of created a world that has a lot of opportunity to farm and to develop. So that helps. But what I write is not really a series. I should point that out because it's not. They're all standalones. They're Easter eggs. If people read all of them in an order, there's probably 2% more things that you pick up that others won't. But they're episodic. They're recurring characters rather than a series that develops over time.
Yeah.
And
Right,
nobody ages.
but I'm sure at the same time you have to like have you established a Jonathan Grave Bible at this point or like a timeline so that you're doing something in book 18 that's maybe that did not like how do you make sure like especially in a series that has gone so long that you are not having a character getting into an action sequence that you're like, oh, this happened in book 5. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, how are you able to balance that?
Well, there's the big issue is technology.
Mm,
That's technology has changed a lot in almost 20 years. So that if you read the older books, I think that's probably what's most glaring in terms of that specific action scene. There's only so many ways to put together an ambush or to pull a trigger or to that's there's going to be some repetition there. So it comes down to the stories themselves and what are the stakes. I'm blessed actually. I don't do a story Bible, but for every book, when I get the copy edits back from the publisher, I also get a style sheet. And the
mm,
style sheet tells me who the characters are, very brief, blonde hair, blue eye, um, drives a Corvette, just kind of a very brief outline, not even an outline, just reminders of what I've written. So I can always go back to that to reference, but it's not continuous. It's not one continuous document. I would have to remember where they first appeared in order to go back and see.
I think it was Mark. I think Mark Greaney had said that he basically has every time he has a new book comes out, he has a new PDF just compiled into one huge document so that you can do a quick search, find someone's name or something like that for the entire. I mean, how many books has he done at this point in the Gray Man series? But I mean, yeah, because like sometimes I mean that's a tough part with even writing a short series, because you want to make sure that things stay consistent because there are readers out there who will know, been like, wait a minute, in book 7, this character, well, was shot in the arm, but in this book, he's, I don't know, stuff like that.
Well, it's fiction, right? So if I had a book like that, I wouldn't read it. It would just take up space. Um, I, I don't I don't sweat that kind of stuff too much. If Although I do have a copy editor who is they're freelance now, at least with Kensington, but I've had him for an extended period, and he will remember things from 2 books ago, and or 3 books ago, and remind me and ask me if it's important that things happen the same way, which I find really remarkable. I mean, if he can remember, I wrote the damn thing. So if he can remember stuff that I don't, that's pretty remarkable. But yeah, that little stuff, and you get it. I mean, you hear from um, fans periodically. You know,
Mm.
with my new series, Irene Rivers, Irene first appeared. She's in the Grave books. She's the director of the FBI, and she sort of falls from grace. And in her own series, she's living in West Virginia, where I live, and and she has her own thriller series. And but she first appeared in At All Costs, which was my second novel ever in 1998, as a field agent. And I just when I needed an FBI director for the Grave series, I thought, what the hell? I'll bring in Irene Rivers. I promoted her. But in the process, I changed the names of her children.
Mm.
So I haven't heard. I just okay, folks. I haven't heard about that from a reader yet, but I realized it when I was listening to the first ever audio version of At All Costs, because they never did an unabridged audio version back because it was tapes. Okay, it was
Mm.
cassette tapes back in 1998, which was a collection of tapes this big. So they never did it. So I was listening to Basil Sand's version of her reading of At All Costs, and I heard her kids' names, and I thought, oh crap.
So, real quick, last thing I want to talk about in terms of the Jonathan Graves series, was the character's name always Jonathan Graves?
Grave, singular.
Or Graves,
Yeah,
sorry. I apologize.
yes, and I'll tell you why. The Well, first of all, I like the syntax of it.
Mhm.
It has the Jonathan Grave. It has a kind of I like the rhythm of it, and in my mind, I'm bad with titles. I had envisioned a series that was grave danger, grave peril, grave, it,
Mhm.
so thus the name. Uh, and I'm the only person on the planet who actually liked that idea. So, but by then I wasn't going to change the name.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really good series character because that's always it feels like always, one of those things you just want to find a good series name character. But sometimes they don't mean anything. Like you look at like Jack Reacher, like, Reacher, what does Reacher mean? Supposedly it's just because, he was tall and people always, asked him to reach for things and he just kind of came from him there. So, the actual writing aspect, I mean, you've been writing now full time for quite a while, correct? I mean,
Yes.
and how many books do you typically write in a year?
Well, now when I was doing the Victoria series, I was doing two a year, which was one every 6 months. And I did that for 3 years, and I'm not doing that again. That's just too much. So now I'm doing a book every 9 months. So I do a Grave book and an Irene book every 9 months. So really, it takes me about 4 months, maybe five, to actually do the writing on the book. So that gives me time to actually do it. And at the tail end of a book, as you know, you're not done with it. Once you submit it, there's another, you wait a couple of weeks and you get the edits back, and then there's the copy edits, and then there's the page proofs and all that. So there's a long run out at the end of submitting a book that interrupts the writing of the next book.
Mm.
So the 9 month cycle seems to work for me. The 6 month cycle didn't.
Do you try to write every day? And actually, let's actually jump back. When you were writing, I mean, are you plotting yourself out kind of like a Jeffrey Deaver where you spend a lot of time on an outline, or you just had that initial idea character and then just go from there?
I am a pure pantser. I just go. I know because I write series, I know the good guy wins, but I really don't know where it's going to go, uh, which is kind of interesting because people at Kensington, if you're listening, close your ears. It's a it's a payment milestone where I have to submit a first chapter and an outline, which is not really. I've been doing this long enough. My outline is kind of a more of a rough idea. More times than not, the final book looks nothing like what I thought it was going to, and the first chapter may or may not even exist. And if it does exist, it might be chapter 12. So
Mm.
it just I don't I don't work that way. I don't know where things are going to go because something ideas come and go. What I found frustrating about outlines is that to me, it bleeds off creativity. The discovery, the writing process is the discovery process, which is why I think I liked it so much when I was a kid. When I did it so much as a kid, it's like playing, right? You just kind of go on a go on this great pretend, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. Oh, that's cool. And then, you know, it's
So going back to Nathan's Run to where you at right now with the new Jonathan Grave book coming out in February. Um, looking back now, I guess what you said, I mean, we're like about 30 years. Like, if you could go back, back then, what could what do you feel that you've learned or that you've kind of gotten better maybe as a writer that you wish you would have known then to maybe save a lot of time? Um, I don't know. Because like, I mean, because writing, I mean, you've written how many books now have you written in all?
30.
And I mean, I'm assuming because I feel it's the same way for me. Like you're constantly growing as a writer, even after 30 books. You're constantly learning different things. You're kind of like you might realize something like, oh wow, this, So like I don't know, like is there anything that you wish you kind of maybe would have known sooner, or just really just it is what it is?
I think the biggest lesson, the hardest book was number two, was At All Costs, because of the stunning success, financial success, and actually sales success, in my view, of Nathan's Run. I was now challenged with writing a second book. It wasn't under contract. It was another spec. Well, Christ, what do I do now? What's the next?
Mm.
What's the next thing? What do they like about it? Because what did I do? How did how do I do this again? And I guess they call it sophomore syndrome or whatever. And actually, it was my wife who said that maybe it's just they like the way you tell a story, so tell a story. And it seems way too simple, but when you get your head in a knot, sometimes the simple stuff that unties it. And I thought, okay, that's probably a pretty good idea. So um, I delved into a I was in the hazardous waste business, hazardous waste remediation and hazardous materials response, emergency response business for quite a while. And I thought, okay, there's some expertise I can bring verisimilitude to that line of work. And so I do families well. I mean, that's kind of my sweet spot is family crisis. And so I just started writing, and that one I outlined, and ultimately the outline looked nothing like the story. The story looked nothing like the outline, and then I really that was kind of the nut for me. I realized, okay, this is it's really about telling a story. The actual story. It's not that the story itself doesn't matter, because it does, but it's really about character and it's about voice. It's about um, giving the reader an opportunity to curl up and enjoy the storytelling voice in their head. That's why Stephen King, I keep coming back to him, is so good. Not all of his stories, in my opinion, not all of his stories, the stories themselves, not all of them are all that great. Even some of his most celebrated stories are that great. Some of them have really crappy endings, in my view. But the journey to get to the ending is so good, you don't care. It's
Yeah.
it's just it's still worth it. And I'm not saying that endings don't care, right? So don't overinterpret what I'm saying. But the writer, or my job is to entertain people in a quiet room by getting into their heads. And to me, that's that was what opened my eyes and my brain. But that happened, 28 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And uh, now I'm completely blanking. I do, you mentioned about Stephen King and endings. For a while, I kind of felt like, man, it is always building up to something, and then the ending is just always very disappointing. And I was like, geez. But yeah, I mean, that's always the journey, I guess, is really kind of also very important. Oh, I want to mention about aspiring authors that, what you mentioned, like if you do write your first novel and you find an agent or whatever else, like it's very important just to keep, start working on your second book. Just because,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you might get to that place. In fact, I think it was Harlan Coben had told Dan Brown after because they had been college friends, so he had read a very early draft of Da Vinci Code, and he basically told him, he's like, you better start working on your next book now because this is going to be huge, and then you're going to get in your head about everything because it's going to be very successful. And yeah, so it's, just if you can, just start working on the next book even before, the first book is published or whatever else, just so that you don't, yeah, because that is tough. I mean, I can't even imagine, especially in you're a newer writer, having a really big book deal and everything else, just, yeah, there's a lot of pressure in that, which I feel like right now you probably still have pressure because you want to write a good book, but at the same time, it's like, it's just a job, you're just telling another story.
Well, it's a job that I love. And I think it's a job that I'm good at. It's a job that I'm comfortable at. And that's the part that scares me actually, is when um it I worry sometimes that uh with the Grave books in particular, there are two characters, Jonathan and his buddy Boxers. They've been together for a long time. I know these folks really well, and they'll get into a banter that just flows, and it feels so easy. And I read it and I think, okay, that works. And then I get all writerly in my head, and I think, well, if it feels that easy, does that mean that it's not good? You know, the whole thing about you're supposed to type till your eyes bleed or whatever is the old quote. So um, I worry sometimes about allowing myself to get back into my head. I usually don't talk about process very much because of that. I'm not. That's not really the question you're asking, I don't think. But it. I enjoy sitting down and playing with my imaginary friends, and I don't particularly enjoy the business aspects of it. The correspondence. I love getting the fan letters and all that. That's wonderful, and responding to those are wonderful. Questionnaires, less so. The it's just anything business related. It's just kind of, you do this more and more, and you get more and more of the stuff that you got to do.
Yeah.
And
Um,
I had a computer virus that killed the vowels on my computer, just the vowels, and I was on deadline. That pissed me off. I
wow.
found it kind of amusing too, but it was just, come on, that's
Wow. That's very actually, well, you know what? Going back to Nathan's Run. So were you doing that on a computer or were you doing it on a typewriter?
I think. Oh yeah, that was my first. That was my first computer. The yellow letters on the blue background, or the white letters on the blue background.
Mm.
And if you italicize, there was some code that you used, and that would turn the letters with a white background. Um,
Yeah, kids these days don't realize how good they have it. I mean, I remember didn't like Ray Bradbury was writing at like the library. I guess there was like a social typewriter. He had to like put a quarter in or something to type in there, and then like then you have this manuscript where you have to either make a copy of it or hope that a publisher sends it back to you because then it could get lost forever. And again, nowadays you just send out a Word doc. So real quick, talk a little bit about screenwriting. When did you? I know you've dabbled in that a little bit. When did you get into that?
when I on the 4 days, 3 days after selling the hardcover rights for Nathan's Run, we sold the movie rights to Nathan's Run in a bidding war, and to Warner Brothers. And 2 years afterwards, I guess I got a call from my agent saying the uh, movie was going into turnaround, and the scripts were and turnaround is the beginning of the death knell. All right, it's a death spiral for a movie. It just means that they're not going to make it. And the scripts that they wrote, it's like they were just terrible. It's a sweet, lovely story that they bought, and they're trying to turn it into something else. And the first screenplay was just terrible. And then they hired another writer who, I swear to God, never read the book at all. He just read the first screenplay, and then it was horrible. So when my agent said it was going to turn around, I got a little pissed, and I said, "Of course, it's going to turn around. The scripts suck. I could write a better script. and I've never written a script. I've never seen a script. And he said, can you do it by next week? And I said, yes, I can. And so I bought Adventures in the Screen Tray, which is right up here. And in that was the complete screenplay for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, How Au Courant. And I read through it and I thought, okay, I get it. Thought I got it. So I wrote the script. Of course, I wrote it in a week without software, right? So I'm doing hard tabs on all this because I didn't know there was such software. Yeah. And I wrote the script, and it brought the project at a turnaround for a little while. The movie was never made, but I had a writing sample. And then I did a number of projects. I did 2 projects for Dino De Laurentiis and another one for Warner Brothers. So it was, if it's going to be a dog, be a big dog.
So have you like have you adapted any of your other books to try to sell, or like that have been option that you wanted to sign on as the screenwriter?
Well, when I sold 6 Minutes to Freedom has been under option in one form or another for 12, 14 years, I guess, from different producers. Now it looks like it's going to be made 2027. And when I first sold the rights or optioned the rights, it's in the contract that I have to be the screenwriter, and it has to be at my current quote, which is quote is what you were paid for the last screenplay, which is not chump change. And so finally, about 8 years ago, I guess they finally got some momentum, and it was going to go to the screenplay mode. So they paid me my quote not to write the screenplay. So it was a pay or play deal. So that's literally the easiest money I've ever made. We refinished our basement with it at our old house. But it was, but that's the only time since then that I tried to make myself the screenwriter. And I am not the screenwriter on when the new version of Six Men comes out. I will not be the screenwriter.
But going back to Nathan's Run, I mean, you probably don't remember like how many words was that initial book? Because I mean, you had a week to do it, obviously, so you probably felt, I don't know, maybe it was just that pressure of that timeline or that deadline, because screenwriting obviously is a completely different beast than writing a novel. Because when you're writing a novel, people's imaginations, you can do whatever. You don't have to worry about certain things. You don't have to worry about like, okay, they're only going to have this location for so many hours, or, how much sunlight is going to be here, or how many extras they're going to have to hire for whatever else. You can do whatever you want, as opposed to, those are kind of considerations that have to come into it. And probably for that initial script that you did, you probably might not have thought about that. Or, I mean, I guess like, I don't know, adapting, a 300 page book into, a 90-minute movie, obviously you lose stuff. And then sometimes you have to adjust stuff to kind of make up for what you lose. I mean, I don't know, like, how do you, I don't know, is that something at this point you've kind of, it just makes sense to you? You're able to easily kind of step into that, or is it still kind of a struggle?
Well, there's a couple of screenplays are not measured in words; they're measured in pages. And my
All right.
version was 119 pages, which is
Basically,
a
for
minute.
every page is technically quote unquote a minute. So
Right,
like,
right. So I wanted to come in under 120. So I came in at 119. Um, I adapted a Nelson DeMille book for Dino De Laurentiis, and uh, it was Word of Honor, which is a long book. It was like a 700-page book, a beautiful, wonderful book, one of my favorites. You just find the through line. You find a movie is not a it's not a moving version, a motion version of the book. The movie is an art form that is based on the story told by the book. So they're entirely different forms of art, and that's the way you have to look at it. And I think that's why producers are hesitant to hire authors to be the screenwriters, because they don't see they have a hard time killing their darlings, right? To to make that happen. In my case, excuse me. In my case with Nathan's Run, it's a pretty streamlined book to begin with. So there wasn't a lot of, and you can do a lot with an image. Uh, you leave a lot to the director and the cinematographer and the set dresser and all that. You can do a lot with an image that's 12 words that will take 40 words in a book, right? So it's just finding that balance. Yeah. And you trust an actor, hopefully.
You mentioned Day of the Jackal earlier. Did you watch the recent TV show with Freddie Redmayne?
Eddie Redmayne. We just did.
Or Eddie, yeah.
We did. I didn't know it was. I stumbled upon it actually. I thought it was really good. I really questioned the casting when I saw it, but it was really good. Season 2 has been approved.
Yeah, he doesn't usually strike you as somebody who can be a kind of a badass assassin. But no. Yeah, he managed to kind of pull it off in that show. Yeah, it was pretty well done. Especially because they had to, modernize it for today's, because what Day of the Jackal was written, God, how long ago was that?
Well, it was set in the 60s. It was written in the 70s. So yeah.
Well, in our time remaining, going to movies, TV shows, or like books, was there anything that you've read, watched, listened to recently that you really liked that you want to recommend?
Well, actually, that was what we just binged, the Day of the Jackal, The Diplomat. I really like that.
Real quick, what I like, because I had the conversation with someone recently. I don't know what you think. So what I love about The Diplomat is it's one of those. It still manages, I feel like, to surprise you, because you always think you know what's going to happen. You're like, okay, well, they're not going to go this way, and they don't. But then they do something completely different. It's like somehow they just manage to constantly, yeah.
And the characters in that, the vice president, the husband in that is just such a child, such a despicable character but he's not really. You kind of like him. I think the characters in that are really good and really strong. I just watched The House of Dynamite. Just let it stay there because it's new enough that I don't want to do any spoilers for anybody. What else? Well, last night I watched The Long Walk, Stephen King's movie, which that is true to the book. I'm surprised this day and age that they did that movie, actually. But
that's my favorite Bachman novel.
Well, it's intense.
Yeah. I heard that it's dark.
Well, it's about a bunch of teenagers who go on a long walk, and everybody who stops gets killed until there's one left. I mean, come on, it doesn't get darker than that.
Yeah. Well, what about reading wise? Have you read anything good recently you liked?
I am now reading a book called Comancheria by Revis Wortham. Did you meet him at BoucherCon? He's a Texan.
I wasn't at the last BoucherCon.
Oh, okay. Comancheria is Western horror, which is it's really fascinating. It's great, very entertaining, but it's unlike anything that I've read before. I'm kind of getting into Westerns, actually. They're not so much the Louis L'Amour, 110 page, old shoot 'em up kind of things, but I like that genre. Some have told me that actually the Jonathan Gray books are Westerns. They're just set in modern times, and I can see that.
People have talked about the same, we've mentioned like Reacher, just kind of like a man coming into town and, basically, getting into trouble, that type of thing, like modern Westerns. Yeah. Yeah. Cause they always have even, I'm assuming you saw like Open Range was one of the more recent, feel like, there have been some recent, even Old Henry. Did you see Old Henry?
Yes. And you know what?
That was surprising.
And I should have seen it. I'm surprised I didn't see the ending coming. Again, I don't want to do spoilers for people. Don't read the description of it because it's kind of the spoiler. I thought that was really good. And generally, that actor I don't know who he is. That actor is kind of odd. Again, another odd choice. But
Blake,
I like that
something Blake. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Netflix is just filled with great stuff. I want to go see Nuremberg is the next thing. Nuremberg might be. We have a theater in the house here, and which is where we watch most things. That's where I watch The Long Walk. I paid for it. Um, I, I'll probably go to the theater to see Nuremberg. I'm anxious enough to see that with Russell Crowe and Rami Malek and the guy whose name I can't come up with.
All right, John. I appreciate you making time. I know we had tried to make this happen for a while, so thank you for again making time. The next book coming out is going to be in February. Can you give anybody like a quick? And again, this is a Jonathan Grave novel. Can you give anybody a quick kind of sneak peek of what this one's about?
Sure, it's called. I don't have the elevator pitch yet. It's called Scorched Earth, and it's about a what is it? It's about a domestic terror plot that is specifically designed to uh, to get Americans to think more about the collateral deaths of children in in um, in terror remediation things overseas. That was a terrible, terrible elevator speech. But it's one of my more despicable plots that Jonathan Grave has to get in and take care of. But will he? So
Have you ever come up with a plot where you did feel like this is too dark to write? I don't even want to like put it out into the world.
yes. And then I sat on it for a while, and then I thought, this is silly. That the bad guys are really smart. If they'll come up with it if I don't, and the bad guys never win in my books. But Total Mayhem is the would be that book, and that's the. I'll be honest with you, Total Mayhem starts with simultaneous terror attacks on high school football games in Middle America, which not in big cities, but in Middle America, it kind of shuts everything down. And for a while, I thought I wasn't going to write about that, but then I thought sometimes if you wake people up and they see that there's an exposure, maybe that'll help local authorities wake up and see that there's an exposure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, if people want to stalk you online, where's the best way they can do that?
Best place to start is always johngilstrap.com. I am John Gilstrap author on Facebook and author John Gilstrap on YouTube. I'm officially on Twitter, but not really. I don't, or X, whatever that is. I can't handle the vitriol. I just don't like being on there. But Facebook is a good place to reach me. John Gilstrap author and johngilstrap.com.
All right, perfect. All right, so again, John, thank you so much for making time. Everyone, go check out John's extensive backlist. We didn't even have time to get into a lot of the other, he's written a lot of other series standalones, but yeah. So again, John, thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll see everybody next time. Bye.